Welcome back to Buddhism Demystified, where we break down complex Buddhist teachings into bite-sized pieces you can actually use in your daily life. Today, we're taking a deep dive into dependent arising, one of the most fundamental yet mind-blowing concepts in Buddhism.
You can think of dependent arising as the Buddhist version of the butterfly effect. It's the idea that everything is interconnected, and even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect throughout the universe.
To help us understand this idea, we'll be exploring excerpts from Lesson 19, Dependent Arising and the 12 Links of Existence. We'll unpack how this concept can help you understand why you experience suffering and, more importantly, how you can break free from it. If you're digging this deep dive so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a review. It really helps others find the show and join us on this journey. Okay, let's dive into dependent arising. So it basically says that everything that exists because of a bunch of other things that came before it. It's like a giant cosmic chain reaction. But instead of atoms, we're talking about causes and conditions.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it this way. You wouldn't be listening to this deep dive right now, if not for a whole chain of events that led up to this moment. Your interest in Buddhism, your access to technology, the creation of the deep dive itself. It's all a result of countless causes and conditions coming together.
Right. And this understanding completely dismantles the idea of a permanent self. We tend to think of ourselves as solid, unchanging individuals. But dependent arising shows us that we're actually a constantly evolving flow of experiences, kind of like a river that's always changing, yet somehow remains the same.
Exactly. And if we can really grasp that our sense of self is a construct, that it's not fixed or permanent, it can be incredibly liberating, because then we realize that all the things we cling to, all our fears and insecurities, are based on this illusion of a solid self.
That makes so much sense.
Okay.
So the source material uses this awesome analogy of a wheel to illustrate the 12 links of existence. Each spoke represents a different link. And as long as that wheel keeps spinning, we're stuck in this cycle of suffering called Samsara.
And what's really fascinating is that the text lays out these 12 links in a specific order, showing how each one naturally leads to the next. It's like a chain reaction, where ignorance kicks off the whole process. This ignorance is about the true nature of reality, specifically the impermanence of everything, and the illusion of a separate self.
All right, I'm already seeing how this gets pretty heavy. So I'm glad the source material also tells this really relatable story about a farmer. It perfectly illustrates how these 12 links play out in a very human way.
Oh yeah, the farmer's story is a classic. So imagine this farmer who's completely focused on getting a massive harvest. He puts all his energy into planting, tending, and basically willing his crops to grow. His desire for a bountiful harvest is so strong, it consumes his every thought.
And that right there is a perfect example of craving, one of the key links in the chain of suffering. He's attached to this idea of a successful harvest, believing it will bring him happiness. But what the farmer doesn't realize is that this craving is actually setting him up for disappointment.
Exactly. Because clinging to any outcome, whether it's a bountiful harvest, a promotion at work, or even a romantic relationship, is bound to lead to suffering. Why? Because nothing in life is permanent. Everything changes.
Okay, so let's walk through this farmer's story step by step, connecting it to the 12 links so we can see how this whole chain reaction unfolds.
Sounds good to me. So we left off with our farmer who's completely consumed by his desire for a bountiful harvest. He's working hard, but he's also super attached to the outcome.
Right, and that attachment, that clinging, is actually the next link in the chain. It's like he's chained himself to the success of his crops, so if anything goes wrong, it's going to hit him hard.
Exactly, and this clinging creates a state of becoming. The farmer's whole identity is now wrapped up in being a successful farmer. His sense of self-worth is completely dependent on external factors he can't fully control.
Okay, so the farmer's ignorance about impermanence has led to craving, which has led to clinging, which has led to this state of becoming. What happens next?
Well, as the crops grow and mature, we see the next link. Birth. This represents the manifestation of whatever the farmer has been clinging to, in this case, his bountiful harvest. It's like all his hard work and anticipation have finally come to fruition.
But here's the thing. Even though the farmer might feel a temporary sense of satisfaction, that feeling isn't going to last.
You got it. And that's where the final two links come in, aging and death. Just like everything else in life, the farmer's crops are subject to decay and decline. The harvest might be plentiful, but it's only a matter of time before the plants wither and die.
And for the farmer who's so attached to his harvest, this is a major blow. It reinforces his sense of lack and sets the whole cycle in motion again. He'll likely go back to craving an even bigger harvest next year, hoping to finally find lasting satisfaction.
And that's the tragic irony of the 12 links. They create a self-perpetuating cycle of suffering. Unless we can break free from these links, we're destined to keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. But don't worry, the text also gives us a way out.
Okay, I'm all ears because this cycle sounds pretty bleak.
It doesn't have to be. Remember those dominoes we talked about earlier? Well, the Buddha taught that we can disrupt this chain reaction by removing some of those dominoes. And the key dominoes to remove are ignorance, craving, and clinging.
So how do we do that?
That's where mindfulness and wisdom come in. Mindfulness is all about paying attention to what's happening within us and around us without judgment. It's like becoming a curious observer of our own thoughts, feelings, and sensations.
So in the farmer's case, if he could cultivate mindfulness, he might start to notice the craving and clinging that are driving his actions. He could observe those feelings without getting swept away by them.
Exactly. And as he becomes more aware of those patterns, he starts to weaken their grip on him. It's like shining a light on a dark room. Suddenly those shadows don't seem so scary anymore.
And I guess wisdom is what helps us to see the bigger picture, right? To understand that clinging to impermanent things is ultimately futile.
Right. Wisdom is about seeing things as they truly are, recognizing the interconnectedness of all things and the impermanence of everything.
The text also tells this really cool story about a weaver that I think illustrates this concept of wisdom beautifully.
Oh, yeah, the weaver. I love that story. What do you remember about it?
Well, the weaver's really skilled at her craft, creating these intricate tapestries with all sorts of different threads. And as she's working, she has this sudden realization. Each thread is completely dependent on the others. The strength and beauty of the entire tapestry rely on the interconnectedness of every single thread.
That's a powerful metaphor for life, isn't it?
Totally. It's like our lives are these tapestries woven together from countless causes and conditions, our thoughts, actions, experiences, relationships, it's all interconnected.
And just like a broken thread can weaken the entire fabric, our choices and actions have a ripple effect on the world around us.
This is blowing my mind. It's making me think about all the choices I've made today and how they've impacted others.
That's the beauty of the weaver's story. It encourages us to be more mindful of the threads we're choosing to act with more awareness and intention, knowing that our choices are shaping not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us.
Okay, so we've explored these heavy concepts like the 12 links, ignorance, craving, clinging, and even death. But we've also talked about mindfulness wisdom and this amazing weaver's metaphor.
We've covered a lot of ground. And I think the key takeaway here is that dependent arising is not just some abstract philosophical concept. It's a powerful tool for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
So what are some concrete ways that we can apply this understanding to our daily lives? How can we actually start to break free from these cycles of suffering?
That's a great question, and I think that's a perfect place to pick up in part 3 of our deep dive into dependent arising.
Welcome back to Buddhism Demystified. In the last 2 parts, we've been exploring dependent arising, this mind-blowing Buddhist concept that explains how everything is interconnected and how this interconnectedness can lead to suffering.
That's right. It's not about escaping from the world or denying our experiences, but rather about changing our relationship to them.
So in this final part, let's talk about how we can actually apply this understanding to our everyday lives. Where do we even begin?
Well, remember those key links we talked about. Ignorance, craving, and clinging. Those are our primary targets. The Buddha taught that by weakening those links, we can start to dismantle the whole chain reaction of suffering.
Okay, so let's start with ignorance. How do we break free from ignorance about the true nature of reality?
The text suggests cultivating wisdom, which isn't just about book knowledge, but about seeing things as they truly are. This involves recognizing the impermanence of everything, the interconnectedness of all things, and the illusion of a separate self.
Right, and we talked about how mindfulness can help us become more aware of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some practical ways we can cultivate wisdom?
One powerful practice is to contemplate the nature of change. Notice how everything around you is constantly in flux. Your thoughts, your feelings, your body, the weather, the people in your life, nothing stays the same.
So it's about paying attention to the impermanence that's happening all around us, even within us.
Exactly. And as we become more aware of this constant flux, we start to loosen our grip on the idea that things should be any other way. We develop a more accepting and spacious attitude towards life's ups and downs.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about craving? We talked about how the farmer was so attached to the outcome of his harvest. How can we free ourselves from this constant craving?
Well, mindfulness plays a big role here too. When we're craving something, it's often because we believe it will bring us lasting happiness or fulfillment.
Like that new phone. That's going to make our lives so much better.
Yeah.
Or that perfect relationship that's going to complete us.
Exactly. But with mindfulness, we can start to see those cravings for what they are, just temporary desires that arise and pass away. We can observe them without getting swept away by them.
So it's not about suppressing those cravings, but about noticing them without judgment
Yeah.
and allowing them to pass through us.
Precisely. And as we do this, we start to realize that true happiness isn't found in external objects or experiences, but rather in our own hearts and minds.
That brings us to clinging, the final link we want to break free from. How do we stop clinging to things that are ultimately impermanent and unsatisfying?
This is where the practice of non-attachment comes in. It's not about becoming cold or emotionless, but rather about recognizing that everything is in flux, that nothing lasts forever.
So we can still enjoy things, but without that desperate need to hold on to them.
Yes. And when we can loosen our grip on things, we naturally experience more freedom and peace. We're no longer so afraid of loss, because we understand that change is an inevitable part of life.
This is reminding me of that weaver story. She realized that the strength of the tapestry came from the interconnectedness of all the threads, but each thread also needed to be free to move and flow.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Non-attachment isn't about isolating ourselves from the world, but rather about engaging with it in a more skillful and compassionate way.
Wow. This has been a truly insightful deep dive into dependent arising. We've explored this complex Buddhist teaching, connected it to real-life examples, and even talked about practical ways to apply this wisdom to our own lives.
It's been a pleasure to unpack these teachings with you.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Buddhism Demystified, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, may you find peace and liberation on your journey